Hi there, my name is Ron Rogers, and this video is titled Flight Test Chase Pilot Tales. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. Now this is a story about how I was doing a chase mission on the B-1 A model, and I not only got into trouble with the test pilot flying the mission, I also got in trouble with the supervisor of flying when I landed. So this is a twofer. I got in trouble twice. Now, this was back in the late 70s when I was a pilot out at Edwards, the Air Force Flight Test Center. And you see that sign there, which I believe is in the museum now, historic sign. Well, that was our sign back then. They didn't have any of these fancy signs like they do now. This was our, this goes back to Chuck Yeager time. And of course, Chuck Yeager was out there at the time I was out there. And he's retired, but when General Stafford would go on vacation, he would set in. I'd brief him, being officer in charge of current operations, but I'm digressing all over the place. That's a short here. But anyway, as you can see on the little thing there on the left side, those are the patches about a lot of the stuff that's going on. We had some interesting stuff there with the Red Hats. We had, of course, test spot school operations. We had the approach and landing tests on the shuttle. We had the F-16 Joint Task Force F-5. It's the only time I've seen flutter. Was on a chase mission on that. We had the F-15, the B-1, that little Tiger II there. That was the F-5 Tiger II, the F-15, and the A-10. So there was a lot going on. And I was a first lieutenant, transitioned to captain there, was promoted. But I was a young pilot. I was one of the people assigned to be a chase pilot that wasn't a test pilot. So I'm on the low end of the totem pole, and I always, I have to watch myself. I'm quite young there. You can notice the hair is a slightly different color. Gosh, I wish I'd love to be able to fly that 38 again. But anyway, I was going to go up on a chase mission assigned to it on the B-1. Now, the B-1's a big airplane, and these are this is a B-1B in this picture, but back in the A models, it's just like the B models, basically in the aspect of this thing carries a ton of fuel. It can go a long ways, and it can go very fast. And typically what they did was they chased it with F-111s. That worked out quite well. Well, Edwards is a very unique place. We have a lot of aircraft we use in chase support. We had 4 F-111s. Now, if you were a base at the time, like I think Cannon was an F-111 base, you had a ton of these airplanes. You could keep the operational rate pretty high. We had 4. And the mechanics who worked on these, they also worked on the handful of F-4s we had. We had 20 T-38s, which were used primarily for chase flying. Great airplane for that, cheap. Good position for the photographer. We had A7s, we had A37s, we just had a whole bunch of airplanes, and keeping all these operational when you had a small number could be quite difficult. And typically we were lucky if we could keep 2 of the F-111s operating at one time. So the B-1, it could be hard-pressed to get the chase support it needed. It was an important program at the time. It was one of the main programs out there at Edwards. It had a lot of priority, but getting chase could be very difficult. Now, this is a big airplane, and those afterburners are huge. And this thing, you don't notice it in the chase aircraft, but if you're on the ground near the thing, this thing is just ungodly loud. And it burns a lot of fuel. Well, the F-111s weren't always available. I did a number of chase flights on the B-1. And we used the T-38. T-38 was good for photo chase. As you can see, we put the photographer in the back seat there. There's a lot of canopy space. I ended up barrel rolling around aircraft so he could shoot down through the top for getting photos, kind of publicity photos is what those were for. But I would do, that type of maneuver to get good photo. But often we would be conducting a chase for weapon separations and things like that. Now, when we didn't need photographic chase, we would put a flight test engineer in the back. And I was going up on a mission supporting the B-1, and it was going through, envelope expansion, something like that, but they needed a chase. And I'm up there, and fairly early into the mission, I developed a problem with the nozzle on my left engine. Now, this is the T-38, and of course the engines are at the back, and that red arrow points to the nozzle section of the J85 turbojet engine there. Now, what happens is, since these aircraft have afterburner in that, and you want to maintain high thrust. So the nozzle propagates, opens and closes for maintaining the proper diameter to make sure you maximize the thrust output. Typically, on takeoff, we'll put the engine up to 100%, which is called military power, and the nozzle will be down low, below 50 or so. I don't exactly remember, but when you go into afterburner, the nozzles swing, and that's one of the things you check. I think they go between 50 and 80. You know, I mean, it's 45 years since I flew this airplane, trying to remember the numbers, but one of the things you say is, two nozzles swinging, and that means the airplane is going into afterburner. Of course, when you're sitting in there and you feel that 40% increase in thrust, you know it goes into afterburner. But that the control of the nozzles is rather complicated. You got the throttle, it goes to the main fuel control unit, and it's tied into the afterburner fuel control unit, and you've got a fuel pump for the main engine part, and you got a fuel pump for the afterburner, and this controls the nozzles. And it's it's a reasonably complex system, and things can go wrong. Now, for those of you that are fighter pilots, you know all about this, but I've got a good cadre that likes to watch this and doesn't quite have that background. So this is the nozzle. If you've been at an air show, you've seen the tail end of an F-15, and these things are wide open. They're wide open typically for shutdown and idle, because you need to let the air flow through when you're trying to start. Now, when you're going at high power, but not an afterburner, they close down, and you can see it now. For those purists here, they got rid of what they called the turkey feathers here, turkey tail feathers. They found that it really didn't reduce drag or anything like that, and it was a maintenance item, so they got rid of them. So that's why the nozzles look a bit different than the other picture, which is an older picture. But when you go into afterburner, okay, these little suckers open up wide because you're just throwing a ton of fuel back into the afterburner section, which you saw on the previous slide there. That's a big section. You're throwing a ton of fuel in there. You need to open up this nozzle and, let all that energy out. Now, there can be a problem here. Okay, so I'm up there chasing the B-1, and my nozzle sticks in the open position. Well, if I was an afterburner, that wouldn't be so bad, but the problem is that reduces my thrust to actually near idle on that engine, and that's the most I could get out of the left engine. The T-38, just as a little trivia point here, if you are on the ground, release brakes, put it in afterburner, you will run out of fuel in 11 minutes because it's very inefficient. You get a 40% increase in thrust maximum, but it's very inefficient in the fuel usage because you're just dumping raw fuel behind the engine and igniting it, kind of like a blowtorch thing, like where you can take a little torch and you take a can of hairspray and you get this big flame. That's kind of what you're doing. You're igniting the gas and you get a lot of thrust out of it, but it's not very economical. But there are times when you obviously want that. Okay, so I'm chasing the B-1. It has a contractor pilot in there, and they kind of run by a different set of rules and stuff like that. And I tell them I need to go back. I've got a problem with my engine. And he says, "What is it?" I said, "I got a stuck nozzle." And he says, "You're not going back." And it's kind of like, what? Well, the deal is when he loses the chase support, the mission's over. Because it's required for the mission, and by me going back, I essentially canceled his test mission, and he wasn't very happy about that because these are big deals, scheduling, coordinating, preparing for these test missions, and he didn't want to lose his chase and have to cancel the mission. So he says, "No, you're not going back." Okay, I'm, a young first lieutenant here, low on the totem pole. I don't want to get into trouble, so, okay, I stay with him. I use the other engine, and unfortunately, there were a lot of high-speed runs, and I had to go into afterburner on the right engine to try to keep up with them, and I was falling behind, and I was using a lot of fuel, and I'm trying to balance the fuel, and of course my fuel consumption rate is higher, and I get to the point where this isn't just working. Now I'm getting low on fuel, trying to fight off an imbalance, getting low on fuel, and I tell them I just have to go back. Of course, the mission was cut short because I was running out of fuel. It wasn't the normal, little bit more economical fuel use, so that cut the mission short. The fact that I had a problem, led to cutting the mission short. So I said, "Hey, I got to go back." So I come in to land. Now the thing is, you're in a big fishbowl out there, especially when you're on a very important test program. And I come back, land, and I park the aircraft. And as I'm walking into test ops, I get met by the supervisor of flying, who proceeds to chew me out for not bringing the aircraft back when it had a problem. And, the deal is, okay, you always have to look at the next failure. Well, I had a very low power setting on one engine. If I had lost the other engine, if it would have flamed out, I may not have been able to have enough power to get the aircraft back to the base, and I may have had to punch out or something, and we lose the aircraft. Okay, very reasonable thing to be upset about. So he kind of reams me over the coals for not using good judgment and bringing it back, and he was right. I submitted to the pressure, which can happen, inexperienced pilots, or, there's all sorts of ways where pilots can submit to pressure, and it's not a good thing, obviously, and I sure learned my lesson there. But after he gets done chewing me out, he says, okay, that guy, that test pilot, tends to do this to people. He tends to, not be concerned about you. He wants the mission. He doesn't care about you. And he basically said, the guy has kind of a reputation for that. Don't let him do it. Okay, so it was kind of he chewed me out, and then he kind of gave me a little bit of a lesson on how I should have conducted the flight, kind of a learning experience. That was actually pretty nice. So it was he was playing kind of bad cop, good cop. But that was my lesson on a chase mission where I was damned if I did, and damned if I didn't. And both of those events happened. Well, I hope you found that interesting and entertaining, enjoyable, whatever. Thanks for watching.